Those hopeful of Alexander Isak joining Arsenal this summer have endured something of a rough ride, but those poor souls may have been given some hope by a recent story, although I think they are rather barking up the wrong tree. This is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hope you're doing good, hope you're doing well, thank you, and I hope you're always winning. Good morning to those in the chat box. Thank you for so much for joining us live. Good morning to Damien, to Stephen, to Paul. We've got Dave and Paul Jr., we've got Jackie and Black Shy, Martin and Mira, we've got Morgie, Jose, we've got Aidan, Olawale, James, Stevie, Roy, Arasilki, Mr. Ree, P Sharp, Barry, Paul. We've got Matt G, Johan, Nicholas, NSW, and plenty more of you guys and girls as well. Thank you, as always, for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. I hope that you've had a fantastic weekend so far. Welcome to Sunday. Welcome to the news. And good morning to those joining and listening, of course, on Catch Up as well. I hope you have had, indeed, such a good weekend so far. Shall we jump straight into today's stories? I think we should. Let's jump straight into things. And of course, if you haven't dropped a like on the video, I think it was certainly worth it for that intro. But please make sure you do and help us to get to 1K likes on the channel every single day. We start with a story of Arthur Okonkwo. He is expected to leave the club this summer and will do so when his contract comes to an end at the end of this month. He left a goodbye message onto his Instagram, where of course you can read that story over there. But I did report last September that when he joined Wrexham on loan until the end of this season with just 1 year remaining on his deal, that there was not an expectation that he would indeed sign a brand new contract. So whether or not Arsenal get any kind of fee remains we don't know, because of depending upon the age, depending upon a number of factors as well. It all depends on how Arsenal look into and where they are at in terms of where he's at in his career. I'm not sure where the cut-off point is for compensation, but I imagine there could be scope for some compensation in this deal. Meanwhile, there's been some drama in Leandro Trossard's world. I don't know if you've been following this story, but rather interestingly, Leandro Trossard's father, Peter Trossard, has been speaking about his son and was rather critical of the Belgian manager following some criticism towards his son after the opening game of Belgium's European Championships. But he spoke to publication De Morgan, where he says, "I don't think Tedesco is a good trainer for Belgium. Although he doesn't have the stubbornness of Roberto Martinez, Leandro Trossard gets criticised, but he was moved from one position to another. That way you don't get a line in your game. But don't underestimate those Romanians. Ukraine was not involved in their first match, but hopefully I'm wrong. The Belgians win and the enthusiasm flares up." Now, Belgium, of course, did beat Romania yesterday with 2 goals doing the job, goals from Yuri Tillemans and Kevin De Bruyne, but Trossard did not start this game. We don't know if this is as a result of what's been said. But yeah, very interesting to see what's been going on. He did come off the bench later on in the game, but he was dropped from the starting 11 for this match. But some drama in the world of Leandro Trossard there, it seems. Meanwhile, Fabrizio Romano has claimed that Arsenal did indeed make contact with Nico Williams, or rather that his camp potentially, several weeks, months ago. Certainly when I chased this lineup the other day, I was kind of given I don't really think so. This one hasn't really progressed at the moment. It doesn't mean it won't progress later in the window, but it doesn't seem that there's much going on. And Williams has spoken out about his future very stringent and strictly, saying, he's not focused on that. He doesn't understand why he's being asked about it. He signed a brand new contract with Athletic and, plans to stay there. There's also a feeling, I think, that Barcelona are his dream destination if he was to go anywhere. So those yearning, of course, for Nico Williams, sadly, I think you're going to be slightly disappointed. Meanwhile, A player that Arsenal have potentially taken a look at, according to Team News and Ticks, is Crystal Palace attacking midfielder Eberechi Eze, a player that I know a lot of Arsenal fans are big fans of, and very much like to see the player join up with the club. Of course, Palace will already be in the process of losing Michael Elise, who will be expected to join Bayern Munich this summer after he chose the German side. Will they lose Eze in the same window? We'll have to wait and see, but there is suggestions of a 50 to 60 million pound price tag on the player, which Arsenal would have to, of course, meet to get him. Do they need a player in that position of that kind of financial level this window? I'm not sure. We will wait and see. But Eze is certainly a talented player and one that I know a lot of Arsenal fans would love to see at the club. Meanwhile, according to HITC, Arsenal have been linked with a move for Milos Kerkez, the Bournemouth left back. Of course, Arsenal could be in the market for a fullback during this window, and Kerkez has had a very decent season actually for Bournemouth, was one of their more impressive players on the left-hand side. Would he offer what Arsenal need in terms of a left-back? I think he's more traditional. Whether or not Arteta wants to go back to a type of traditional move in that left-back area, we'll have to wait and see. But very interested to see what happens at the left-back area in the summer, because we don't know what's going on with Zinchenko. We don't know if Jakub Kiwior is still going to be here. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one. And lastly, as I hinted towards at the start of the show, Newcastle are said to be looking at a brand new striker. And that striker, according to a number of outlets and David Ornstein, is Dominic Calvert-Lewin, rather interestingly enough. He's not had the best of seasons, of course, as we know, for Everton. But that has not stopped Newcastle from becoming somewhat interested in the player. Now, of course, immediately what we saw was some suggestions that that meant that we might see Isak leave. I don't think that that's the case, despite some people clinging on to the idea that indeed would be the case, because, of course, Callum Wilson is still at Newcastle. Now, I would expect Calvert-Lewin to be a replacement should he leave. And I don't think that Calvert-Lewin, fills the goals of Isak were he to leave by any stretch of the imagination. So sadly, for those hoping that this signing would indeed be anything other than a Callum Wilson replacement, I think sadly you're going to be disappointed, because I think that is exactly what this is. Right, let's go to part 2, where we can discuss this and plenty more with your questions right after this. Okay, part 2. This is the element of the show, of course, where we will be taking your questions and answering as many of them as we can during this section. So if you've got one, please make sure you drop into the chat, and I will do my absolute best to answer it for you. Gary says DCL is a replacement for Wilson. Isak's signing a new contract. Arsenal fans are obsessed with Newcastle players. It's getting embarrassing now. Gary, are you a Newcastle fan? If you are, and you're accusing Arsenal of being obsessed with Newcastle, I would ask the question, why are you here? Julian says, what's happening with the Raya deal? Doesn't the clause run out at the end of June? Don't worry about that, Julian. The Raya deal will be absolutely fine. I'm told that there are no surprises expected, but whether it will be done now or whether it will be done in July, you don't need to worry. Islam says, look at the deals between Chelsea and Aston Villa. Not just Chelsea and Aston Villa, Chelsea, Aston Villa and Everton. They're all at it. We're not silly. We know what's going on. And, to be fair, what's to stop them from doing that? What's to stop them from doing deals between one another? Will it be looked at? Will it be investigated? Will it be, I don't see how it could be. How could this? If you're not savvy enough, we know that Chelsea, Aston Villa and Everton are all facing profit and sustainability regulation scrutiny. And all three clubs are doing deals between one another. What's the right word? Coincidentally, I think is probably the best word to use here. We're all smart enough to see it. We're all smart enough to know, the benefits that will be there for all clubs for doing those deals. But can you begrudge them? I don't think I can. I don't think I can begrudge them doing that. I think they've seemingly worked a way to work out how to deal with these profit and sustainability issues. So, it's all there for everything to see. Tom says it's interesting to see the effect of profit and sustainability regulations with Prem teams using separate player swaps to balance books. I don't understand the criticism about it, since this is what most people wanted to happen. Indeed. Trevor says Raya is a Brentford player until the end of June. I mean, he'll be a Brentford player technically after June. If he doesn't, obviously that deal doesn't go through to Arsenal. But as I said before, there's no surprises are expected on that front. Sufyan says, hope you're well, Tom. You too, mate. Any updates on Fofana? No. There's been no other stories surrounding Yusuf Fofana and Arsenal at the moment, so I'm afraid not. Nothing to report so far. Justin says, watched Neto for Portugal last night. He looked good. Let's get him and hope he replicates Odegaard's fitness. Yeah, Odegaard, of course, a player who did suffer with injury issues prior to joining Arsenal and did suffer a couple at the start of his time with the club as well, but has staved off those issues and certainly overcome them, it seems, and played very reliably and regularly for Arsenal. Could Neto do the same? Well, he suffered from very different types of injuries that are a lot more long-lasting. So whether or not that would have a significant impact remains to be seen. Rich says, Tom, what's the situation of Bruno Guimaraes' release clause? Is it that a deal just a pipe dream? The situation with that is that the release clause of £100 million expires at the end of this month. And for Bruno Guimaraes to leave Newcastle, a team would have to come in and pay that amount of money. Now, there had been some reports at the start of June and even into May that Newcastle might accept something below that. I was always a little bit cautious of that because I don't see why they would. They haven't necessarily needed to. The reporting around Newcastle's PSR scrutiny, I think, has been blown way out of proportion, to be honest. I don't think they've needed to sell anywhere near as much as what people have suggested. But if a club comes in like a Manchester City, for instance, for Bruno Guimaraes, I think he would certainly be wanting to go. Newcastle fans can fool themselves into thinking that he's very committed to them. But trust me, knowing Bruno Guimaraes and seeing his kind of progression through teams, you can see that he wants that next step. You can see that if he was offered the opportunity to go to an Arsenal or Man City, I think he would grab that opportunity with both hands quite quickly. But of course, it's not down to him whether he leaves. It would be down to Newcastle, and they would need to be offered an amount of money, if not the release clause, then something else that would tempt them into selling. Kieran says, do you think Elise to Bayern effectively takes Eze off the table? I don't think it's impossible, but Crystal Palace will do whatever they can to make sure it doesn't happen. I think there's something to be said about the fact that I think there may be a release clause. I think there's been some suggestions that Eze may have a release clause in his deal. Let me just do a quick Google check. Yes, suggestions are that there's a 60 million release clause that also includes a further 8 million in add-ons as well in his contract. So it depends if you're willing to pay the release clause, I guess, and then of course how Palace are willing to do any business on that front as well. Kish says, haven't Arsenal and Edu already lined up their targets from about 6 months ago? Edu mentioned 180 pages of detail. Or do things change last minute? Of course things change last minute, Kish. It's a transfer window. Things change all the time. Arsenal do plenty of planning and strategizing. But when you make a move for a player, and when you can make moves for players, of course, is very different. Those telling you that you might expect Arsenal, after making all these plans, to make a move on the first day the transfer window opens, are misinformed and, sadly don't really know what they're talking about. When it comes to transfers, things change very quickly. And of course, opportunities open up at different times, and players are willing to talk at certain times and not others, and clubs are willing to talk at certain times and not others. You can only control what you can control, which is when you make your inquiries, when you make your talks, but you need to have the willing parties on all three sides to make deals happen. And no matter how well you plan, you need things that are out of your control to fall your way for those details to take place. Tizer says, hi, Tom. With release clauses, do they have to be paid all at once, or can they be done in installments as long as the clause is met? Also, any news on Kira Walsh's transfer? The Kira Walsh transfer from Barcelona has gone a little bit quiet. There was a lot of noise about it this week, but it's gone a little bit quiet since then. There was kind of a big hype around it basically happening, and now it has dipped down, that interest from 3 or 4 days ago. The interest is there. I guess we'll have to wait and see if that happens. It would be an excellent signing if Arsenal can pull it off. But in terms of release clauses, it depends upon the clause. So some clauses, like Thomas Partey's, for example, had to be paid in one bulk. Other release clauses can be paid in installments if indeed the clause states so. I believe, from the best of my knowledge, that the Bruno Guimaraes' release clause is one of those that can be paid in installments. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure I read that it is one of those. So it depends upon the clause, Tizer. What other clubs can, of course, do is you can bid over the release clause of a player that, say, has a release clause that must be paid in full. And then what you can do is after paying over the odds, you can then stagger the payments so that it's done in those installments. What's interesting though is obviously that you have release clauses that are paid in installments, but a transfer fee is still spread across the length of a contract through amortization on the books. So there's differences in budgeting and then of course what you're spending on the books. So there are some intriguing kind of nuances when it comes to different deals. Sally says, is there anyone you've seen in the Euros that you weren't aware of before that's made you think they could be great for Arsenal? It's a really good question because obviously what the European Championships does is it gives you the opportunity to watch perhaps some players that you haven't seen too much before. Now, I can be honest. I can be honest and say that, to be honest, the European Championships have gone on where I've watched some of the games, but what happens usually for me in summers and when there's summer tournaments is unless I'm working it, which I haven't really been, I tend to take my summer off from football as much as I can because I've spent so much of my life covering football for the last 9 months. I'll watch the England games, I'll watch some of the bigger games, but I can't be sitting here and saying I've watched all the games because I haven't. But I have been impressed, by Germany, and I still think that Joshua Kimmich would be a really good signing for us. I got into a few discussions with people. Yes, I know this is not a player that I hadn't heard of before. Of course, I've heard of him, and we've talked about him before. But he is a player that I think, from a perspective of what Arsenal need, if they can't bring in a top midfielder of a younger age, he's a great player that can come in over the course of a couple of games. So I think that Kimmich still stands out for me. But in terms of players that I wasn't really aware of, there's not really been any so far. But I'd be intrigued to see if anyone in the chat box, Sally, can answer your question, who have maybe watched a lot more European football than I have during this summer. Black Magic says, with the margin of the valuation between Gyökeres and Isak narrowing, doesn't it beg the question as to why Arsenal don't push the boat out and go for Isak? I don't think it is narrowing, is it? I don't think it's changed. Gyökeres has a release clause of 100 million euros, 86 million pounds. And Isak has a price that continually is talked about in upwards of 150 million because he doesn't have a release clause. I don't think it's narrowed whatsoever, to be honest, mate. If anything, it's widened because there's suggestions. I mean, the claims, of course, from Leonina, that Portuguese outlet, have said that Arsenal would do a deal below an initial fee. That is, of course, below that 100 million euro release clause. So I don't think it has narrowed. Chris says, Tom, would you take Rabiot on a free? No, I wouldn't take Rabiot on a free. Ben says, with Poland out of the Euros, do you expect that Kivior links to AC Milan to intensify? If we do sell, I'd rather not. We better get a windfall of cash. Yes, I would expect that if that's the case, because, of course, as we know, players do tend to make more moves when they're not taking part in those European Championships or the Copa America. So it'd be intriguing to see how that story develops. Kieran says, to be fair, this is a good shout. I do obviously know of Gehi for Sally's question, but Gehi has been a player that's impressed me a lot for England. He's probably been our best player, actually, besides Bellingham maybe. But I think even across the 2 games, he's been the most consistent performer of the England players. So I have liked what I've seen from Gehi, and I would be open to signing him this summer. But Kieran says, also just take a note, but Gehi will be going this summer too. He has 1 year left on his contract and has decided not to extend. So that's certainly one to look into. And I hope that Arsenal, if they do go for a defender, look at Gehi as a potential option. It's going to says, I'd be looking at breaking the bank for Rodri or Fabian Ruiz. Yes, good luck with that on Rodri. Fabian Ruiz, good player, but I think the boat has sadly sailed on that one. Tyler says, who's your John Jensen? I was there at Highbury for his goal when it finally happened. Of course, a player that our older listeners perhaps will be more aware of. And one of the players, of course, Arsenal down the years have signed players that have done well in championships and World Cups, and it's gone varyingly. It's had varying degrees of success. So I don't think there will be a Jensen signing this summer, but I could be proven wrong. Let's go to Chris, who says, Tom, is Southgate the worst manager at the European Championships? Probably not. No, I'd assume not. I mean, there are managers that haven't won a single game, and there's managers there, their teams have underperformed as well. So probably not, but he's not one of the best. Alvin Mod says, Chris, yes, without a single doubt, the worst manager in Europe, all competitions and leagues. Again, I don't think it's that bad. I wouldn't go to that level. But certainly I think England should be looking to get someone better. Rich says, would you rather sign Bruno Guimaraes or Kimmich? Bruno Guimaraes, I would rather sign. Tommy says, Leroy Sané is coming to Arsenal. Watch this space. Tommy, the ITK in our chat box, dropping some transfer bombs in there. Temi says, would you take Ronaldo on loan for a free? No, thank you. Rich says, yeah, he would be a great signing. Also, he comes across brilliantly in interviews, far better than other footballers as well. Depends what footballers you're talking about, Rich. I personally had a great time interviewing plenty of footballers and think that Arsenal's ones in particular come off very, very well. Captain Pants says, hi, Tom. One on multi-club models. What league/country would you advocate Arsenal looking to buy a club in, or rather buy a stake in, I suppose, and why? Any specific clubs you fancy? I think that obviously where Chelsea have gone with Strasbourg makes a lot of sense. France have got a fantastic record of developing some brilliant young players, which then are exported around the world to different clubs. So I think France is an obvious candidate. I think Belgium is potentially another one. The Netherlands you look at sometimes as well, being good at developing young talent. It gets trickier when you look at others. I mean, Man City have hit something of a gold mine with Girona, of course, who they helped get up to the top tier of Spanish football, of course, as well. They weren't initially in the top tier of Spanish football. So they've done brilliantly with them. And maybe Arsenal could do something similar if you wanted to invest in a lower league Spanish side or a lower league French side and help them get up to the top tier with investment in them, gradually improving them so that you can then sign better players and develop them through them and then, of course, sign them through. Multi-club models are here to stay, and I think it's something, as I've talked about before, that Arsenal need to look at. I couldn't give you any specific clubs, but there's some specific leagues that I'd certainly look at. For instance, I feel like a Rice-Onana duo feels a bit clunky. I'd much rather a Rice at 6 and Eze at left centre mid who breaks the low block lines. I have said before that Rice at a 6 it's one of his, if not his best position. I know for England he didn't have the best of games the other day. Who is James McLean, by the way? And I think that when it comes to the idea of signing a midfielder, I would like Arsenal to sign a top box-to-box. I don't know if Eze is a box-to-box. I don't think he is. Can he play left centre mid? I don't know if I've seen him really play that position before too much. But I like the idea of it. I like the theory of it. Onana, I agree, is not the player that I would go for during this window. Sean says, seems like clubs do this less and less now, but swap deals for Eze, Gehi, and Neto, and Nketiah, Lokonga, Tavares, Nelson, all surplus. I mean, swap deals are a rarity, but seemingly happening a bit more than we have come to expect in the Premier League, although what you will be told is, of course, that these players are moving in opposite directions for transfer fees, not being swapped straight up. So that's worth. And usually that is what happens. Even with the Alexis and Mkhitaryan deal, a transfer fee, I believe, of around 30 million was exchanged in both directions for those two players. So it has happened to Arsenal, of course, in the past. Dwayne says, Tom, random fun question. Keep Saka, but Southgate is our manager, or sell Saka and keep Arteta? Oh, my goodness. Keep Saka, but Southgate becomes our manager, and sell Saka and keep Arteta. Goodness me. I have to put the club first, and I feel like the answer is obviously to keep Arteta because, and I know I'll get ripped for that, but I think that having a bad manager has a much greater impact than having one good player, and that would be my justification for that choice. It would pain me, but to see Arsenal turned into what England do is something I do not ever wish to see. Something I'd never, ever, ever, ever wish that. The manager is always going to be the key point, the key visionary for all of the players in the squad. So one player cannot be bigger than the guy that is leading you forwards to your goals. So yeah, that would be it. So there you go. MA says, morning, mate. Love your shows. Keep it up. Always really early because of my 1-year-old. Thanks, MA. Very much appreciate your time. I wonder what the MA stands for. Tyser says, hi, Tom. How would you feel about getting Davey to play up front and Sunak down the left and Farage on our right-hand side? Could be a formidable team in Europe. Yeah. The word Europe there doing a lot of the lifting in that sentence, mate. A lot of the lifting. So Nicholas says, why would someone ask that? I know. Not that last question. That was a Saka Southgate question. Ben says, of all of the credibly linked players we have seen, who would you least like to come through the door? Probably Onana, to be fair. I think Onana's probably stands out to me as the one I'd least like to come through the doors at Arsenal. I think that trying to think of any others that have been linked that I'm really not keen on. But I'm struggling, really. I mean, thankfully, we've not really been linked to too many poor ones, I guess. But yeah, Yeah, I think Onana probably would be the one I least am keen on Arsenal going for. Forder says, Tom, would you be up for a collab at some point? Just add Alex and the Different Knock and James B from Air TV. Would love you to come on. As I've jumped on loads of channels before. It mainly depends on time and scheduling because I am insanely busy. But if I can squeeze them in, I try my absolute best to do so. So, of course, you can drop me a message on socials and I'll endeavour to get back to you. Real Gooner says, Tom, I'll make it easier. Sell Saka and have Ten Hag as manager, or sell Saka and have Maresca. Why you make this is I mean, sell Saka and have Ten Hag, or sell Saka and have Maresca. So I have to sell Saka either way. I don't want Ten Hag. I appreciate what Enzo Maresca's done at Leicester. I think I'd probably go for a risk and go Maresca. Why are you making me sell Saka? What's that about? Reese says, Tom, do you think Timber will start a left back? I think there's a good chance he might, but it was interesting that he came on in the last game at right back. I don't think that should be discounted at all. Z says, what do you make of Chelsea's Conor Gallagher? Would you like him? I do like Conor Gallagher. I don't think he'll be the player that we go for though this summer. I'd be very surprised as well. A1 says, Tom, you have the right to remain silent. And I do choose to be on many topics, but I was more than happy to answer that one. Boss Willis says, Tom, I hope that Arsenal will go for the young Turkish player Arda Güler, who could be a backup for Saka. He looks quite the talent for the future. He's quick, skillful, and will be a good addition. And he's going absolutely nowhere, mate. So Real Madrid have no interest in selling Arda Güler and are very happy with him and looking to integrate him into the team in the coming seasons. But of course, it may be tricky with the talent they've got up top, so that could change in the future, but then not this summer. Arda Güler is going nowhere, at least not permanently. Mr. Thugi says, maybe it's just me, but the Rice stuff makes little sense. He's one of the best number sixes in the world, and we want to move him onto an 8 and buy a 6 who isn't even close to him in terms of that type of level. I know it is strange. I think it's dictated a lot by the market. Still no real progression on the whole Partey exit thing at the moment either. So there is very much an unknown quantity about the midfield and what we are going to do, because the names are not forthcoming in this area at the moment. So things, of course, can change. MA says, would you take Xavi Simons on loan? Yes, I would. Chris says, Tom, break your leg, keep Saka, or sell Saka and no broken leg. I guess I got to take the broken leg, Chris. But that I'm such a wood now because I don't want any bad omens. But yeah, I guess, Chris, I've got to put the club first, mate. You know, just to do a James Nicholas and health second, Arsenal first. Anyway, I think I'm going to bring the show to an end before I start signing my soul away for something in the name of keeping Bukayo Saka at Arsenal. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate your time, as always. Do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. And, as a quick product review, very good quality. Very, very good quality indeed. So don't get upset about a soft toy, people. It's just a joke. Good morning to you all. Appreciate your time and have a fantastic rest of your Sunday. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy. And as always, up the Arsenal.